Hello guys, this is Panzer 36, and today's video is going to be update number 3 in my Panzer III in Africa buddy build with Mr. Hamilkar Barkas. Hamilkar Barkas is one of the original YouTube modelers, and he's a great friend of mine, and we both are building Panzer IIIs in North Africa because that's always really cool, and the Panzer III is his favorite tank. So if you don't know about Hamilkar Barkas, I will link his channel up in the top corner of the video, up here somewhere, and you guys go check it out. He will also have a video up right now. His third update is going to be covering the painting and weathering on his British armored car on his own diorama. In my video today, since I only have one vehicle and I already updated you guys about it last week, instead I'm going to update you guys on the progress I've made building the diorama and also painting a figure, which is kind of amazing for me because I have not built a diorama or painted a figure in probably about 4 years. But I don't seem to have lost my skills because so far both these are looking pretty good. The first thing I want to do is to actually update the Panzer III because I have done a little bit more on it. First of all, I applied some pigment to the lower hull. That was simply a Wilder pigment called, I believe it's dry European mud, and I simply just dusted that on the lower hull areas a little bit because I wanted there to be a little bit more dust, of course. Last week I mentioned that I didn't want to put that on until I built the diorama, but I got bored and I did it anyways. So you can probably see that appearing on the sides of the hull. Also on the engine deck, I've applied a little bit of like fuel stain, engine grime effects. So there's a little bit of a glossy effect you might be able to see about there. That's where the fuel is filled up in one of those hatches there. So there's some stains on there, and I've used a Wilder grease effect. So they have a slightly glossy sheen to them, which always looks good. I enjoy adding a little bit of wet effects on my tanks occasionally. And I think it was, somebody mentioned this last week, it might have been Braille Scale or Dan Timmerman. They asked me if I was going to add some wet effects to it, and of course I have since done that. So that's actually it. The Panzer III is exactly as you saw it last week. I might have added a small piece of stowage there. I don't remember if I showed that last time, but it's basically the same. So I think next we will look at the diorama because it's right in front of us, so we might as well start with it. As you can see, it's basically scenic, but I have yet to paint it or apply any of the dusty sand and vegetation. My original plan was to have the tank coming over a rise, maybe a sand dune, but I kind of changed that into being more of a like a riverbed. So you can see the elevation we have going there, and similar on this side. As you can see, nothing is parallel to the edges. The tank is offset and at an angle, and so are all the changes in elevation. I began with a wooden base. I think it's like a painting board, so that was on the bottom. Then I glued a piece of pink insulation foam on top of it, something I know from my model routing days, which are still occurring, but that's what we always use for terrain because you can very easily cut it and shape it. Now I don't have the best tools for that. I don't really have any tools for that except for an X-Acto knife, but I made do with the X-Acto knife getting the rough terrain down. After that was all done, I wanted to of course smooth it out a little bit. So once again, from my model routing days, I went with a product I knew, which is Sculpt-A-Mold. Sculpt-A-Mold is kind of like a paper mache plaster hybrid, you might say. It's like little bits of fibrous, almost like papery stuff mixed in with plaster, so it's kind of like half paper mache, half plaster. It goes on really nicely, it sticks to anything, and it dries nice and hard. And that gave me the smooth, well, relatively smooth ground effect that I wanted. Then once that was complete and had dried, I moved on to some clay. I used some Das air dry clay for the top areas because I was originally planning to sand the Sculpt-A-Mold down smooth, just because I want some areas to be quite smooth, of course, because it's going to be sandy. It's a desert, but it wouldn't really sand that well. I mean, it was sanding, but it was going to take me so long because there is enough texture, enough up and down bumpiness to the Sculpt-A-Mold that it was going to take me like days to get it smooth. So instead, I just put this air dry clay on all the areas that I'm planning on having be sandy and smooth. That was much faster, and it actually came out pretty good. And then of course the last step is to apply the cracked riverbed area. For this, I use a product which was by the brand Golden, which is a art store brand, and it's called Crackle Paste. And it's this thick gel-like material that you spread over anything, I guess. It's mainly meant for like creative art stuff, but I use it on a diorama here. So I applied a thin layer, and then once it dries, depending on how thick the application is, you'll get varying thicknesses of cracks. So I kept it really thin because I want my cracks to be obviously in scale, because this is 1/35 scale. And then the result is actually really good looking. I thought it was going to look worse than this. I know that AK Interactive produces a product which is like probably the same thing but rebranded. It's like a desert crackle paste, and it's probably almost the same stuff. But I haven't tried that. Instead, I had the stuff at the art store I bought specifically for this project. So I'll zoom in a little bit so you can see how it looks. You can see that I've got, of course, the clay, the red clay is the areas that are going to be fairly smooth in the end with some sand. It's going to be a little bit more rocky on some of these areas and around like the little kind of cliffs up here. And of course we have the riverbed at the bottom, and you can see that that stuff actually looks pretty nice. I am very happy with how that crackle texture came out. And then the Panzer III sits on it very nicely. It gives me the nice kind of like, you know, sweeping dynamic diorama I was planning on. So it's kind of like this. I want the Panzer III to be not just sitting straight and flat. I want it to be interesting. So I have it kind of coming over out of the riverbed, I guess you could say. And then I don't know, maybe they've stopped and they're just taking a peek before they advance, or maybe they're waiting for the desert rats to show up or whatever. You know, it's just like a diorama. It's not entirely realistic because I think they would probably stay a little more hull down than this in real life, but you know, I've made it still quite hilly here. And the whole plan is like, it's basically like a dried riverbed. So you have the actual like cracked, the main riverbed down here. And then you have the kind of like the slow hill coming up here where I will have some vegetation. And then we have like almost like a cliff face up here. And then this is more of the desert up here. And my idea is, based off some photos I've found, it looks like it's kind of like a riverbed that occasionally gets wet. But I guess sometimes when they have a mega flash flood, it really like rips down here, and it almost like carves a cliff at a much higher elevation. So this is like the actual desert, and then this is kind of like the weird rocky area where the plants usually show up, and then this is the main riverbed down there. And it looks pretty cool because you have actually like 3 different tiers of land, and it'll be fun to weather this up and I guess kind of paint it. I have some sandy like pigments and stuff, and I'm going to also put some little shrubs on there. And then, I should also mention that, you know, I have a nice side of the base. That was simply some styrene sheet that I cut. I kind of put the diorama on the side, and then I just traced it, cut the sheets out, and then I glued them on, and then just smooth out the edges, and it actually looks quite nice. I did have to do a little bit of like sanding, of course. Hamilkar Barkas is like the diorama expert guy, and he uses balsa wood for the sides, and then he just can cut it very easily to match when he also cuts the foam, because balsa wood is quite soft. And I would have done that, but currently it's the quarantine time and I can't go buy balsa wood, so I just use the sheet styrene I have on hand, and it looks pretty good. So next update is going to be, of course, the completed diorama. So at that point I'm going to paint the sides black and then do the rest of the scenic effects up on top. And the other thing I've done for my diorama is I've painted a little dude for my Panzer III. This man is from a master box set. Let me grab it if I have it on hand here. It's this set, which is meant for obviously a Panzer II, I guess, though they're quite generic looking guys. And it's this man, but I just didn't even use his legs, so I just used the top half of this dude right here. And the figure itself was actually looking pretty good. It's a well detailed figure in real life, or when he's like all sculpted up and you've put him together. I didn't have to use that much filler. I think I used a little bit on one of his shoulders. I glued him onto this little kind of like holding base thing that one of my good modeling friends has. He built this for me like a bunch of years ago, and I have now finally painted a figure. I glued him on with some little sticks there so I can paint him nice and easily. And as you can see, he looks quite nice. My painting skills for figures obviously haven't deteriorated that much. Of course, I picked a very easy figure because you can't see his whole face. eyes and like stuff like that are the hardest parts of painting figures, it seems. So I kind of just picked a guy who I don't have to worry about painting his eyes. But of course, there's still lots of flesh on his arms and a lot of folds in the fabric there. So to actually paint him, I used some of the fairly new AK Gen 3 paints. I have a whole bunch of them. I didn't have any flesh colors, so I actually airbrushed the flesh with one of the new Tamiya desert colors for desert tanks because it looks like flesh. So I airbrushed him with that. I also primed it with black primer. And then all the actual like painting was done with those new AK Gen 3 paints. I did a product review on those when they were just brand new, and they are super good for brush painting. I believe that they have a set of flesh tones from the AK Gen 3 line, so I'm going to buy that because they're really good. For the fabric and all the clothes and stuff like that, I just had to mix up like random colors, like basically like Dunkelgelb with some like fluorescent green, and then add some maybe like an olive green in there, and then eventually it kind of looks like this fabric color that I was going for. And then I add some more yellow and like buff to make it look like the hat, and then of course adding white and black to it to make it lighter and darker for the highlights and shadows. Of course, if I have a paint set on hand that's like painting DAC uniforms, it would have been much easier, but I had to mix up all the colors myself. I have a pretty good eye for mixing colors, so it wasn't too unfortunate, and it was actually fairly easy. I think I painted him in just about an evening or so. For the skin, I actually used some oil paints. I have some Wilder oil paints which are meant for flesh tones, and I used a couple of those, and also a dark red oil paint from Wilder as well. And then I just thin them down to a very thin mixture, and I carefully brush it into some of the shadow and highlight areas, and it actually doesn't look that bad. I have never used oils for painting figures before, but that's a very common thing now, and I probably should try that out a little bit more as well, because it is a lot easier to blend those natural soft flesh tones, because on the fabric you have much more sharp edges to the folds, but on the skin it's much more smooth, and it's harder for at least me, because I'm kind of not great at brush painting. It's harder for me to get soft transitions when I'm painting with those colors that are acrylics. But with the oil paints I can much easier blend out the transitions. So you can see how he gets like a darker red kind of on the backs of his arms there. And then of course I've got like a highlights kind of on the edges there, on his elbows and stuff. The face isn't really that visible, so I didn't bother with it that much. And maybe you can see I've also done almost like shading on his cheeks where his cheekbones are, and on his ears. For painting the hair, I just used like some brown paint and just like did a little bunch of like brush strokes. Kind of looks bad, but that's the best I can do. Overall, this figure is, for me, it's like a good old 7 out of 10 probably. I'm actually really happy with it. It could of course be better, but it's not bad at all, and I don't think it will detract from how the tank looks, because he's not that standout, and the way that the colors look, they're all kind of muted and subtle, and he looks like he will fit nicely on the tank. Also, you can see the nice kind of like shine on his binoculars. I use a little bit of the Wilder Murky Water, which is an enamel gloss varnish, and just brushed a little bit of that into the lenses, which are conveniently sunken a little bit on the kit. So you just put a little drop in there, it'll flatten out and give you a nice looking lens. So there's my little guy. He's super cool. I do like him a lot, and I'm proud of my result there painting a figure. Of course, I'm not a figure painting expert. There are a bunch of other channels out there you can look at for painting figures. I would recommend, of course, Hamilkar Barkas. He paints a bunch of figures. He has a ton of videos on it. Of course, I'm building the Panzer 3 with him, and he has some figures in his diorama. He recently had a bunch of videos on painting like French guys and stuff, so you should check those out. There's also E&E, who does a bunch of videos on painting figures as well. A bunch of different techniques, small and large scale. He is really good at it. I met him in Chicago back in 2017. He's a really cool guy, so you should check out his channel as well. And then of course there's also Small Soldier. He's also really good at painting figures, and he recently put up a video on painting a Rommel bust using almost exclusively oil paints, and that looks amazing. And then there's also Shane Smith, who does a lot of figure painting as well. He's also known for all his Sherman tanks and stuff, so if you're doing maybe more American figures, he probably has a bunch of videos on that as well. So those four guys, Shane Smith, Small Soldier, E&E, and Hamilkar Barkas, are the guys I'd recommend you guys go check out if you want to see some proper figure painting tutorials. But I have a bunch more figures that I'm now kind of looking forward to painting. So I'm probably going to give you guys in the coming months, every once in a while, maybe another video on painting a figure. Oh, I should also mention that there will be a tutorial on this guy as well, and of course a tutorial on the diorama coming up, along with a tutorial on the Panzer 3. There are full tutorials on all three of these parts of the diorama, so after the updates are done, I will try to edit those up and have them out for you guys pretty soon. So you can look forward to seeing how I struggled with diorama and figure painting after a long absence, but I am very pleased with how this is all looking so far. Alright guys, so that's about it for this update today. I hope you guys enjoyed it. I hope you're looking forward to my 3 videos coming up after the buddy build is complete, of course. There will be a weathering and painting tutorial on the Panzer 3, a painting tutorial on the figure, and a building and painting tutorial on the diorama once I, of course, complete it next week. Next week's video will be the final reveal and also, of course, summarizing the painting of the diorama. I hope you look forward to that, and I also hope you guys go check out Mr. Hamilkar Barkas' video today. Once again, it's on painting and weathering his British, I think it's like a Mormon Harrington, something like that, British armored car with the contour paint job, which is that like blue and yellow kind of like triangular stripy camo that I'm going to be doing in September on a build project. It's a pretty cool camouflage, and it's interesting to see how he approaches it. I'm probably going to learn how to work on my tank in September based off his video. Anyways, hope you guys enjoyed and learned something new. Again, this is all going to be in more greater detail when I finish these videos up. Big thank you to my Patreon supporters. Those guys really helped me buying the paints and products that I show in the videos, like all the diorama material and the AK Gen 3 paints I used on this figure. So I'll see you next week. Goodbye, happy modeling, and stay safe out there.